Hi there YouTube, it's Joe from Team Shift here. So today we're just going to be looking a little bit at branded. I have a lot of thoughts about branded. Sometimes it's going to be a little hard to explain all of these, sometimes it's going to feel a little bit like I'm rambling. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about the deck, some of the choices I've made at the minute in the lead up to the UK Nationals, and what my current list is looking like. This isn't like a top deck profile or anything, this isn't from like a regional or anything. And this is post Cyberstorm Access, so obviously everything's still in a little bit of testing. It's going to take a little bit of time before the list is ready to go, but hopefully this video helps someone understand sort of where other people's thoughts are coming from. Obviously there's a lot of deck lists out there you could also take a look at, take some information from everywhere, make your own decisions. This deck is incredibly hard to build, there's so many options, but I hope this sort of helps you understand some of the card choices that some people are playing. So this is the current list. So to start with, I'm playing 3 Fallen Hours. So some people might play 2, a lot of people are also on 3. Main reason being it's very good when you're going second, you can fusion deployment it, you can just actually use the effect of it. Because we have Guiding Quem now as well, it turns this even more into an interruption. So the card was already good at breaking boards, but playing 3 of it means you see it more often. And also because of other cards we're playing in the deck, you can just fuse with it in your hand just as a material and start to go straight into your Albaz fusion monsters. Also there's 3 in the deck because sometimes you get multiple hit by Kashtira and you can still play as long as you have 1 remaining. So that's the Albazes. So the consistency, the starter card of the deck. So 3 Aluba, a lot of this is going to be fairly obvious. 3 fusion deployment. This summons your Albaz. It also summons Dark Magician if you're playing it, and of course it summons the Cartesia. 3 branded fusion, and then 3 branded opening. So the branded opening just got a little bit better. The card was already very, very good as a consistency card, summoning the Aluba, but now we can also summon the Guiding Quem, which means it can make your board a little bit better. Obviously before, if you just had the Aluba and an opening, it's a little bit awkward. You kind of had 2 cards that did the exact same thing there, but now you can summon the Quem and your boards get a little bit stronger, or it's a little bit of backup, in case everything goes wrong, you get Nibiru, that sort of thing. You can still set it up and summon the Quem in their turn. And then the last 2 sort of like starter cards as such I'm playing are, I'm on 2 Nadir, I'm not on 3, so I never wanted to draw multiple of this sort of ever, and I just wanted to bump up my numbers of cards that let me play if I have sort of no other starter cards at all. We're in a format now where we're actually having to play quite a few bits of non-engine in order to be able to deal with decks like Super Heavy Samurai. And what I found is that this deck sort of struggles sometimes if it's 1 card starter can't resolve. So this deck plays lots of bits in its deck that when it all combines together, it lets you break through the board. So for example, drawing the Albion, that lets you set up an Albaz engrave. Things like the Mercuria, getting to banish that off a fusion, getting you an extra body to be able to play through a board. All those extra bits though sometimes contribute to bricks. And what I found is that when we start to cut those cards for non-engine, the deck gets a little bit worse. Like, we're having to play off a 1 card, but if our 1 card engine gets hit by a hand trap, we just aren't as good as them. If our Rebellion gets hit by a Veiler, all of a sudden our turn ends, so we just have to hope that we see another 1 card starter, and that we have these hand traps and non-engine in our hands. But the Nadir Servant sort of doesn't care about, like, say, the Ash, right? So all these other things are like trying to aim to go towards the branded fusion. The Nadir Servant is an extra layer of, well, it wants to get hit by Ash. You can certainly hit, for example, the Kit in the end phase of this, or the Quem that comes off of this with hand traps. But it just gives you a few more plays. I just didn't want to play max out the copy of this because I'm also on cards like TTT, and if the goal is to draw cards potentially off TTT when you're going second and again playing into those boards, I don't want to see multiple copies of this really ever. Again, like I said, this video is going to be a little bit rambly. So the rest of the Albaz cards that we're playing, so I'm playing double Cartesia, and I'm playing the Quem. So it's a fairly new card, so I'll briefly explain it. This card is always a Dogmatica monster, and it's always a Despia monster. And it just lets you put the Albaz monsters into your graveyard when it's summoned. So we can summon this off of opening and use it to send cards like Albaz at the very least, and then if your opponent tries to play from the extra deck, what happens is this triggers if a card leaves the extra deck to summon one of those Albaz monsters from the grave. This can also send any card that lists Albaz. It doesn't have to be the monsters, so you can send Retribution in the same way that Saronir can. It's also a tuner, the same as the Cartesia. So now I'm playing Mercuria, playing the Albion, and I'm playing the kit. So I'm on the kit because of the Nadir Servant, but it is also one of those starter cards if you're really desperate. But it's not as good, obviously, because you have to put a card back in your hand to the bottom of the deck. So the Albaz branded spells were on, so branded in red. I did try very briefly the list and was sort of talking to people about a list that wasn't on some of this stuff. But the idea was if you give up this card, you lose actually a lot of your interruption on your opponent's turn. Yes, the Quem contributes to some of that interruption, but this lets you make things like the Chimera, which can just seal the deal in a lot of cases. And again, it's a card that lets you play through the boards. However, again, as I said earlier on, sometimes these cards contribute to the bricks, but I felt the branded in red was absolutely necessary. So branded High Spirits, again, this is part of the Nadir Servant line, but also because we have more sort of the Albaz monsters now with Quem, this card is a little bit better. You can discard Quem and send something like a Grand Guignol, or you can send, say, a dragon and send another dragon and search the Quem off this. So this card's got a little bit better, and sometimes it's just in the deck because it's just discard fodder, you know, for things like branded opening, and then it keeps recurring every turn, and then eventually you use the card for this actual effect. You can also use it to trigger the Guiding Quem as well, which is quite nice. So you can summon the Quem, send an Albaz, and then your opponent's turn, you use the High Spirits, revealing a card, send from the extra. You don't have to use the extra effect, you just send from the extra deck, and then that triggered the Quem to summon the monster back. So I'm unbranded in white, and part of the reason I'm unbranded in white is because I'm still on the Dragoon. I tried without it, and just decided to go back to it. Reason being is that nothing's really changed about Dragoon, it's still just as strong as it was before. And this is one of those cards that helps you push through hand traps like Ash Blossom, for example. There's not much Bell going around, there's not much DD Crow, so it doesn't hit this card that hard. In those senses, this card is just a polymerization you can search off of your branded cards that do searches for the spells. Another one, branded Lost, because the card is obviously very, very strong. It's absolutely critical in certain matchups, and it forms part of the line where you go down the Saronir with Lubellion, the Lubellion line. So you get it for free a lot of those times. You don't always have to go down this line, there are other routes you can go, but what I found is that I'm always doing this line at the minute, because I'm not on the Ad-lib or the Tragedy. It's something I want to go back to and try again, but again, as I said before, a lot of these extra cards start to contribute to bricks, and we need to start making decisions about, do we want to go for the high roll and just try and not brick and just pray, or is there a sort of sweet spot where we can play these cards that give us that higher ceiling, but that sort of minimise the chances of the bricking. Ad-lib is a very strong card, it gets way better with branded in red, and in all honesty, it's part of my favoured line to go down. I'd rather go down the Ad-lib line a lot of the time, but that's probably just me thinking back to the glory days of sort of the Nationals format before. The last branded card we're playing is the branded Retribution. I'm at the minute setting this as an interruption a lot of the time, but there are lines you can go down where you send this to grave and then use it to add the white or add the branded fusion. And then the two bricks of the deck, really. So I'm on the main Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. I'm not on branded Expulsion, partly because the new fusion monster kind of fulfills that spot. You can use the Albion, the Sanctified Dragon, to summon this card, and then the Dark Magician is the brick that you need for the Dragoon, which a lot of the time this card is what helps you push through those boards going second and just potentially OTK people. So then the non-engine, no surprise really, is Drawn Lockbird. This card is incredible as format. I think it should be in most deck lists. I don't think that's going to change before Nationals. I think this card is probably locked into the deck. And then the only other two hand wraps are 2 Ghost Ogre. This could be 2 Imperm, it could be 2 Ash, it could be 2 Nibiru. As it stands, it's 2 Ghost Ogres, just because I've seen quite a bit super heavy around my area. But I'm open to experimenting with all this stuff. 2 Triple Tactics Talent, with the amount of hand traps going around at the minute. This card is very, very good for looking into your opponent's hand, seeing what's left so you can play around the rest of the hand potentially, or you rip away their starter card and then you set up the one interruption maybe that gets through the rest of their hand traps. And then free Super Poly, which is both a really, really good interruption against certain matchups, and it's really, really good at breaking boards. We all know about this card, I shouldn't need to explain this. Cool. So I'll talk a little bit about the extra deck. So there's 2 Mirror Jade. You still go through 2 sometimes. There's potentially a way to cut down to 1, but you might find that one gets banished in a little bit of a longer game, and you have to waste Lubellion putting it back to then make it later on. It's just worth it just to play the 2. So I'm on 1 Lubellion. Could very, very likely play 2 of this. However, I always try and prioritise to put the Lubellion back with its own effect. You could also shuffle this back with Retribution if need be, but I'm trying to shuffle this back with its own effects and just keep myself having lots of options in the extra deck rather than just playing 2 by default. 2 Albion. I'd love to play 3 of this card again like older formats, but there just isn't the space. Again, nothing new about this card. The new card, however, is Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. This card has been really, really good in some matchups where the fact that it can't be targeted is really strong. So, for example, against the Runic decks, where they can't Flashing Fire it, for example. This card is what lets you enable the Gimmick Puppet lock without the trap card. And then the other Alves fusions is the Sprint, part of the Medea combo, but also very, very good going second sometimes, where you can use it to move columns and pop cards on the board. Not a lot of people know about that effect on the card. But also it's one of the dragons that lets us summon Alvaz in the end phase. And then Rinbrum, still very, very good against Kashtira. It's a good interruption that you can send from your extra to grave with Mirror Jade, and then use it to summon the Albaz and fuse with their board. What's nice about the Sprint is that it's very easy to fuse pretty much anything your opponent has into this, because it just uses a monster that was special summoned this turn. An effect monster that was summoned this turn, sorry. Then the rest of the fusions. So we have Grand Guignol, we have the Dragoon that I talked about earlier on, we have a Dragus Stepelia, I have Guardian Chimera because I am still on that branded in red. Again, like I said, I did try a little bit and was talking about a list that didn't play it, in which case you wouldn't play this card, you could play something else. Then we have one of the other new cards, which is Despian Lulu Walalith. So I'm not on any other Despians from the extra deck. So this is my target for Grand Guignol if I get to use the effect of that card. It's also something you can potentially make, and this forms an extra interruption, and it's also weirdly an out to some awkward monsters to kill, because it allows us to pump our boards up, like the old Fleur de Lis. It just allows your board to suddenly create game from nowhere, because all of a sudden you've got 3-4 monsters gaining 500 each, and like I said, get over some awkward monsters that are hard to kill. And then the last 2 targets are just 2 things for Super Poly, the Mud Dragon and the Garura. Come up in different matchups. The Garura, again, you can dump it off Grand Guignol to draw a card, and then potentially branded and white it away from the grave to make a Mirror Jade. There is that combo. But ultimately they're there for Super Poly mainly. You could play other targets like Starve Venom, if you wanted to play like the branded Trap card, branded Banishment. Banishment got a little bit better with this new set, because you can use it to summon the Guiding Quem, because it's always a Despia in the graveyard. Something I was also trying in the extra deck was the Titaniclad. However, in the end, because I'm playing the Super Poly and because I went back into the Dragoon, there just wasn't the space for it. But it probably would be the next card I'd play. It can be an Arise Heart out, just because it gets big enough to attack over the Arise Heart, and it can summon the Guiding Quem. Then I'll very briefly go over the side deck. Not going to talk too much about this, it's probably going to change in the lead up to Nationals, but this is what we're currently playing. So 2 Lava Golem, pretty good into Samurai, 3 Kurakara for the Kashtira matchups. I'm liking 3 Magnamut just as like a coverall for some random decks that just happen to get hit by it, but also something that hits Mathmech specifically, and something for the mirror match. I did want to play Duraswim as well, but I've changed the side deck a little and cut it out. Then we've got 3 Dark Ruler No More, very good against Samurai. Then just a bit of coverage for the sort of decks you might see at locals, so 3 Cosmic Cyclone, and it's also very good going second into some decks that like to use their engine to draw cards like the Floodgates traps, like Anti-Spell. It gives you something you can immediately fire off at that card as you draw into your turn. And then pretty much the only card that goes in going first a lot of time is the Branded Expulsion. Just having the search will offer things like Aluba and Kit, and settable off the Albion means that you're more likely to be able to do the combo alongside the Albion Fusion. So having both means you're more likely to do it, basically. Plus the fact it can summon banish monsters means that if you could set that up by banishing all the materials, you can't get Bestialed on this card or Belled. So those are sort of my thoughts on the deck at the minute. Sorry if it was a bit rambly. I've got a lot of thoughts about the deck. It's kind of hard just to ad-lib it and talk at the time. If anyone has any questions about the deck or the list or anything like that, feel free to pop a comment in the section below. Big shout out to the rest of the team. There's not many of us playing branded at the minute, but one of the other guys is, so occasionally we do talk about the list. Big shout outs to our sponsor, Zombie Games Cafe. Hoping to work a lot more alongside them in the years to come. But yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section down below. I'm more than happy to answer them. Again, this is just a deck. This is where the deck stands. Things will likely change, and feel free to hit me up and we'll have a chat about it. Take care. Bye.